The road had no right to be quiet. It was the sort of road that usually screamed tires grinding gravel, metal clattering, voices pitched too high because everyone pretended they weren't afraid. But now it lay stunned under a sky the color of old steel, and the platoon moved along it like men walking on the ribs of some giant animal. Sergeant Morrow raised a fist and the line halted. "Listen," he said, though there was nothing to hear but the wind running its fingers through broken birch trees. To their left, beyond a hunchback fence, a cluster of farmhouses sagged into each other. The tiles on the roofs were popped with shrapnel, windows stared out like wet eyes. Private Calder adjusted the strap of his pack. "Sir, we've got 10 minutes before the next barrage window, if they're keeping the pattern." "They might be changing the pattern," Morrow answered, and drew a map like an origami animal from his pocket. He was trying to make North sit still. It wouldn't. North slid around like a frightened fish. The village ahead had no name on the map, just a rectangle of gray, crosshatch structures of unknown type, probable ambush risk. Still, the platoon needed shelter, a roof that wasn't the sky, and they needed water. The first shell came like God clearing his throat. Everyone flinched, and then the second shell made everyone move. They scattered into the ditch at the right side of the road, crouched behind an overturned cart, rushed a gate that creaked like a voice losing hope. Dust bit the back of Morrow's throat. "Contact!" someone yelled. "No eyes, no eyes," called the radio man. Rabbit named for the way he could vanish behind anything. A fence post, a rumor, a comma. Morrow's boot hit a shape under the weeds. He looked down. It was a metal lunch pail painted with a giraffe. A smear of jam glued the lid shut. "Clear the first house," Morrow barked. "Calder with me." They crossed the yard, stepping over a child's tricycle tipped onto one wheel. The door of the cottage had been arrested mid-breath, jammed open by a splintered frame. Inside, the smell of damp earth and the sweet rot of apples. "Hello." Calder's voice was too careful, like he was speaking to glass. They room cleared by the book, corners first, barrels low, eyes high. A teapot lay on its side and had made a little brown lake on the table. In the corner, a hand-drawn picture was pinned to the wall, a boxy green tank smiling with square teeth, and next to it a stick figure boy holding red balloons. The boy had too many fingers. Children always drew too many fingers. Reality did, too, when it was scared. The next barrage arrived farther off, like a conversation happening in another room you couldn't get into. Morrow dropped his rifle muzzle and glanced at Calder. "Basement," he said. Calder found the door under a hanging cloth. It opened onto blackness that smelled like the inside of a wet book. He clicked on a small torch, and the beam made a pale tunnel through dust. "Friendly," Morrow called down. "We're friendly." Silence. Then a sound. Not a sob, not a word. The delicate scrape of something small shifting its weight. Morrow crouched and descended first, each step negotiating with the wood. The beam found a pair of eyes the color of milk tea. A child stood there, no taller than Morrow's rifle, hair stuck up like he'd slept inside a hurricane. He wore a sweater with a bear on it and mismatched socks, one blue, one yellow. "Hey," Morrow said softly. "Hi, little man." The boy didn't answer. He clutched a metal toy in his fist, a tiny tank, paint chipped along the turret ring. The toy was heavy for its size, as if it had swallowed a secret. Calder knelt next to Morrow. "Where are your folks, bud?" The boy looked past them, as if calculating the distance through their bodies to the stairs, the door, the sky. Then he held out the toy tank, palm up, like an offering or an order. He tapped the turret with his thumb, once, twice. Then he pointed upward. "Up," Calder echoed. He mimed turning a wheel. The boy blinked once, solemnly, as if confirming a technical detail. Morrow felt something in his chest unlock with an audible click. "We've got to move," he said. He scooped the child with one arm, the boy light as a folded blanket, and the three of them climbed into daylight, that had gotten older in the minutes they were gone. Outside, the platoon had found a shape half buried in the hedgerow at the far end of the village street. It didn't belong to the village. Nothing this big belonged to any village. It was a tank-angled armor plates, a face like a box-jawed animal, a barrel canted down as if considering its sins. Its skirts were webbed with ivy. Someone had tried to drape it out of existence, but there it was, too stubborn to disappear. Engines cold, Rabbit reported. Palm on a hatch. Tracks are good. Fuel unknown. Crew absent. Left in a hurry? Calder asked. Or carried out, Rabbit said, the way a man mentions the weather before it turns. He peered at the hull number, then at Morrow, then at the boy in Morrow's arms. Boss, you see this? The boy squirmed, and Morrow set him down. Without hesitation, the child walked to the tank like it had called his name. He laid his small hand on the armor, and for a second his fingers looked like they were listening. Don't, Calder began, a protective reflex that arrived too late to be useful. The boy found the commander's hatch handle with the sureness of someone who'd practiced in a dream. He tugged, it didn't budge. Morrow stepped forward, took the handle, and twisted. The hatch gave up with a cough. Inside, shadows, canvas filters, the smell of grease and iron and old yells. Sergeant, Rabbit said carefully, artillery's going to remember this street any minute. If we're going to make a bad decision, we need to make it quickly. Bad decision, Morrow said. We're choosing between a roof that moves and a sky that drops rocks on your head. Get the boys in. We'll see if this old girl's got a heartbeat. They moved like men at a baptism, each entering the tank with a private prayer. Calder slid into the driver's seat and swept dust from the dials with his sleeve. Rabbit fed the radio a new hope. Morrow climbed up to the commander's position, lifted the boy after him, and set him gently on the padded rim. The child's feet made to clean prints in the dust. Listen to me, Morrow said to no one and everyone. We are not staying here to be sorted by shrapnel. We're going to put this box in gear. We're going to move to the copse beyond the far field, and then we'll reassess. Copy, Calder said. He found the ignition switch, the choke, the primer. She's an old model, but not prehistoric. Morrow glanced at the boy. Do you have a name, chump? The child's mouth opened like a night flower. The word arrived quiet, but it had a spine. Leo, he said. Leo, Morrow repeated, and felt the syllable take the measure of the tank's interior, as if sound were a carpenter. All right, Leo. You sit right here and hold on to this handle. Can you do that? Leo nodded once. He held the handle with both hands and watched Calder's left foot the way a hawk watches a mouse. Calder primed, breathed, primed again. On your mark, do it, Morrow said. The engine coughed, caught, coughed again, and settled into a grumble that seemed to come from a floor below the world. It ran like an animal that had been sleeping under a hill and was not fully convinced the hill was gone. Vibrations traveled up through the hull into their bones, becoming part of them. The platoon outside cheered once, and then remembered to be quiet. Rabbit's voice crackled in the headset. We've got maybe 20 shells worth of mercy before they walk it back to us. Calder, Morrow asked. Clutch in. First gear. Releasing brake, Calder said, his voice steady. Leo tugged Morrow's sleeve and pointed past the periscope. Morrow leaned to look. Beyond the hedge in the field, a low line of stones stepped toward a gap in the tree line. The path through the gap angled away from the village, half concealed, like the idea of escape embarrassed itself. You see that? Morrow murmured. Calder glanced through his slit. Could be a farm track. Could be a drainage swale. Could also be Death's front porch, Rabbit said. But if the kid's pointing, maybe Death's out to lunch. Morrow looked at Leo again. The boy's face was untroubled, intent. He tapped the turret ring with 2 fingers, twice. Then he touched the periscope glass, a whisper of skin on grit, and pointed again, same direction, patient as a metronome. Take the track, Morrow ordered. Slow and smooth. The tank shuddered into motion. Outside, boots scrambled, voices counted, the platoon forming a ragged escort on either side. The village slid backward. The tricycle with its single proud wheel, the open door with the arrested breath, the lunch pail that would never be opened by its intended hand. Overhead, the sky seemed to lower itself thoughtfully, ready to become rain or fire. They reached the hedge break. Calder feathered the throttle, coaxing the tank like a stubborn mule. The right track kissed a stone low, the hull rose and settled with a sigh. A shell landed somewhere to their left and threw a curtain of soil into the air. It rained down on the tank like applause from very small gods. Steady, Morrow said, though his stomach was trying to climb through his ribs. Contact front? Rabbit asked, voice keen. Negative, came the reply from the forward scout, breathless in Morrow's ear. But you've got tracks. Fresh. Not ours. Could be circling. Calder's knuckles whitened. If they see this old girl moving, they will, Morrow said. Our job is to be already somewhere else when their eyes arrive. Leo let go of the handle with one hand and touched the edge of the periscope again, as if blessing it. He made a quiet sound, something like and pointed, not at the track now, but slightly left, where a shallow depression ran parallel to the path, barely visible, a soft-edged scar in the field. Morrow trusted the instinct that had carried him through years. Sometimes the shortest line between danger and safety wasn't straight. Left 2 degrees, he said. Ride that swale. Keep the profile low. Calder obeyed. The tank dipped. The view narrowed to a greenish tunnel, and the engine's rumble became a private storm. A shell struck the village street behind them. Splinters of roof tile climbed the air, and then regretted it. The platoon huddled closer to the hull as they moved. They were almost at the cops when the second sound came, nastier than the first, an engine that didn't belong to them. It growled like a dog that knows your name and hates it. Rabbit swore under his breath. They've got armor to our north-northwest. Morrow felt the tank's heartbeat in his teeth. We keep moving. No heroics. Leo's head tilted. He closed his eyes for the space of one breath, opened them, and pointed upward. Not forward, not left, not right. Up toward the branches of the copse before them, where leaves rattled like coins. What? Calder began. Smoke, Morrow said. Rabbit, do we have smoke? 2 cans. Maybe 3, Rabbit answered. Pop one into those branches as we enter, Morrow ordered. Let the canopy catch and carry. Make the trees exhale for us. Rabbit's hands moved fast. A moment later, a soft bang, and then the smoke blossomed above them like a white flag that had forgotten what surrender meant. The wind caught it and pulled it across the gap the way a mother pulls a blanket over a sleeping child. They slid into the copse. The world outside went hush gray. Morrow finally let out the breath he'd been hoarding. He turned to Leo. The boy looked back, expression unchanged, but his fingers trembled where they held the handle. Morrow put his hand over Leo's, warm against small bones. You did good, Morrow said. The words felt inadequate. You did very good. The platoon filtered into the trees around the tank, shoulders lowering, eyes blinking like men waking from nightmare into another kind of dream. Rabbit pushed his headset back and leaned into the commander's hatch. Boss, he said, you want the strange part. We're inside the strange part, Morrow said. Rabbit pointed at Leo with his chin. The kid keeps pointing the way we ought to go before we know we ought to go. I'm not asking how. I'm just saying we should keep listening. Morrow nodded once. He looked at the boy 3 years old, socks mismatched, sweater with a bear sitting inside a cathedral made of steel. Outside, the enemy's engine prowled and sniffed, confused by the tree's breath. For now, that was enough. Calder, Morrow said quietly, kill the engine. We rest for 90 seconds. Then we move again. Same plan. Same silence. The engine wound down, and the sudden quiet was so loud that they could hear the leads correcting their posture. Leo released the handle, curled one fist around his toy tank, and tucked it against his chest. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply held the tiny weight that was heavier than it looked, and watched the door of the world, waiting for it to open again. The copse was a cathedral of silence. Tree trunks leaned in like tall, black-robed priests, and smoke curled around their shoulders, muttering half-remembered prayers. The platoon huddled close to the tank, grateful for its mass the way shipwrecked sailors are grateful for a piece of wreckage that floats. Sergeant Morrow crouched in the leaf rock beside Calder. "How's she looking?" Calder ran a hand across the dashboard, fingers brushing gauges that flickered with ancient fatigue. Engines serviceable. Transmissions stiff but alive. Fuel maybe half a tank. That'll get us 10 miles, give or take. If we keep the RPM low, maybe more. 10 miles, Morrow repeated. He glanced at the men, at the boy perched inside the hatch. Might as well be 100 if we don't know which 10 to take. Rabbit tuned the radio with the delicacy of a man shaving with a razor made of ice. He shook his head. Static thick as soup. I can catch whispers, but they don't speak our dialect. Enemy chatter, maybe. A twig snapped. Every rifle snapped up with it. But it was only Leo, clambering down from the hatch to the ground, toy tank still clutched in his fist. He wandered toward the trees with the purposeful wobble of a toddler who had just learned the meaning of walking. "Hey, no, Leo," Calder hissed. He reached out. But Morrow held up a hand. "Wait." The boy knelt in the leads, brushed them aside, and found a fallen branch shaped almost like a crank handle. He studied it, then walked back to the tank and tried to wedge it into the starter port. Of course it didn't fit. But the way he moved was not random. "He thinks it needs winding," Rabbit said softly. "Like a toy." Morrow crouched beside the boy. "Not a bad instinct. She does need help waking up." He pulled the branch free, tossed it aside, and tapped the steel with his knuckles. "Don't worry, Leo. She'll keep walking if we keep feeding her." The boy pressed his ear to the armor, as if listening to a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, smiled faintly, then scrambled back onto the hull. "He trusts it more than us," Calder muttered. "Wouldn't you?" Rabbit said. "We're flesh. Flesh bleeds. That thing's a giant in armor. If I were 3, I'd give it my vote too." They decided to move at dusk. The light would be on their side, shadows long and careless. Morrow briefed the men quickly. "Objective is to reach Hill 45. High ground, defensive potential, line of sight for 10 clicks. If command's still intact, they'll be rallying there. If they're not, well, then at least we'll have a place to die loud." The men nodded, each storing away their fear in private pockets. When the engine roared to life again, Leo clapped his hands once, decisive, as though approving the choice of direction. He stood in the commander's seat, toy tank tucked under one arm, and raised his other arm forward. "Kid looks like a general," Calder muttered into the intercom. "Then let's hope Hay's a good one," Morrow replied. The platoon moved out, boots soft on the damp soil, tank grinding low through the undergrowth. Each branch they crushed seemed to shout their position, but the smoke still veiled them, dragging like a tired curtain. They reached the far edge of the copse as twilight folded itself over the land. Beyond lay open fields, checkered with stone walls and ditches. And there, less than a mile away, a ruin of a farmhouse still stood, roof collapsed, but walls mostly intact. "Shelter," Rabbit said. "Or trap," Calder countered. Leo raised his tiny fist, pointing to the farmhouse. His voice, when it came, was small but clear. "There." Every man froze. It was the first full word they had heard from him since the basement. Morrow studied the child's face. No fear, no hesitation, only certainty. "All right," Morrow said. "There it is." The tank led the way, treads chewing earth. As they approached, shadows peeled from the walls. Enemy scouts, rifles shouldered. Shouts in a foreign tongue. Contact! Rabbit screamed. Gunfire erupted, sparks dancing on the tank's armor. The soldiers dropped to the dirt, returning fire in bursts. Morrow ducked into the hatch, yelling, "Calder, forward!" Pushed them off balance. Calder gunned the engine. The tank lurched, plowed through the shallow stone wall with a scream of stone against steel. Enemy rifles cracked, but the platoon pressed forward behind their moving shield. Leo gripped the hatch rim, eyes wide but unblinking. He pointed again, this time at the upper floor window. Morrow followed his gaze, saw the glint of a machine gun barrel sliding into position. Up top, Morrow barked. He swiveled the turret by hand, muscles straining. Calder elevated the gun. One shell thundered out, pulverizing the window into smoke and fire. The boy didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, solemn, as if ticking off a line on an invisible list. Within minutes, the firefight sputtered out. The enemy scouts melted into the night, leaving bodies and silence. The farmhouse was theirs. The men leaned against the tank, panting, ears ringing. Rabbit spat dust. "I don't know if I should be more afraid of the enemy or of following a toddler into battle." Morrow looked at Leo, who was now patting the tank's armor with both hands, humming a tuneless little song. "Maybe both," he said. Night gathered, patient and deep. They fortified the farmhouse, posted sentries, and shared what little rations remained. In the corner, by lantern light, Leo sat with Calder, tracing the outlines of the dashboard in Calder's notebook with clumsy crayon strokes. "Teaching him how to drive already?" Rabbit asked. Calder shrugged. "Feels like he already knows." Morrow watched the boy's small hand dragging red lines across the paper. Outside, the tank loomed against the moonlight, its barrel raised, its heart still warm. Steel giant, open heart, and somehow, a child's hand fit perfectly on its pulse. Dawn didn't rise so much as it leaked, pale and thin, through the broken ribs of the farmhouse roof. Morrow stood in the doorway sipping water that tasted like coins and old wood. The fields lay quiet except for a faint thread of fog, as if the earth were exhaling sleep. Calder checked the tank as if it were a living patient oil, coolant, track tension, the ancient clutch that liked to argue before it obeyed. Rabbit worked the radio, catching a few intelligible syllables among the static. He'll fall back corridor and, once, a single word said, 3 times in a voice that might have been command. "Hold, hold, hold." Leo woke without ceremony. One moment he was a bundle by the lantern, the next he was vertical. Toy tank tucked under his arm, gaze already scanning for the steel giant outside. He padded barefoot to the doorway. When the tank came into view, he stopped, lifted his toy, and matched the angle of its barrel to the real one like a salute. "Morning, General," Rabbit murmured, too soft for anyone but himself to hear. They ate in silence, hard biscuits softened in a tin mug and a smear of something that claimed to be jam. The men were stingy with their eyes. No one wanted to look too long at anyone, as if a stare could borrow luck. Morrow laid the map on a crate. 2 miles of patchwork fields, then a ravine that cuts east-west. Crossed the ravine and were within sight of Hill 45. "We stay off the high ground until the last possible second, and we do not silhouette. We move, we don't stop to argue with ghosts." Questions. No one had any worth asking. They mounted up. The hatch swallowed Morrow's shoulders, then Leo's small body as Morrow lifted him to the commander's perch. Calder slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scrape of worn leather greeting his hips. Rabbit wedged himself by the radio and made his headset a crown. The engine turned over on the second try, shaking a small rain of plaster loose from the farmhouse rafters. The men outside formed fire and flank, breath puffing in white calmers. The tank rolled. Fields combed themselves into rows beneath the tracks. The fog snared the hull and let go in long silks. Birds rose late and irritable. For 10 blessed minutes, it was only motion and the soft private thunder of the engine. Then Rabbit touched the fingers to his ear. Movement, bearing 085, he said, fast, low. Morrow rotated the periscope. The fog was a curtain behind it, shapes. 1 became 3. 3 became 5 armored cars, full flow and lean, fenders flexing over ruts. Contact, Morrow said, steady. Calder, down to degrees, use the ditch for cover. Keep the hull low. Calder guided the tank into the shallow depression. Mud climbed the skirts, the world shrank to a green-brown tunnel. Outside, the platoon knelt, rifles leveled, each man a small piece of decision. Leo tugged at Morrow's sleeve, then pointed sharp, insistent to the right, where a tattered hayrick leaned against a stone wall. His toy tank's turret turned with his fingers. He mimed a little circle, as if to say, not just right around. Flank. Rabbit breathed. Flank, Morrow said. Calder hard right, slow. Well, use the rick for a mask. As they crawled, the armored cars fanned out, confident in speed. The fog did their scouting for them. One car nosed ahead of the others, engine barking. It would see the tank in 3 seconds, maybe 2. Hold, Morrow said. He set his shoulder to the turret handwheel. Steel groaned. The turret moved like an old man getting out of a deep chair, resentful, but moving. Leo laid his palm flat against the ring, skin on cold metal, and the motion gained a whisper of ease. The sight picture settled. A rectangle of fog, a darker shape within it, the curve of an enemy hood aimed like a fist. Up 1, Morrow said. Calder elevated. The gun drew breath. Send, Morrow ordered. The shot cracked the morning in half. The recoil shouldered through them. The shell crossed the short distance, as if the space were embarrassed to exist. The armored car folded at the front, hood snapped back, a black blossom of smoke and steel petals. Target, Rabbit said, voice thin with awe. Target. The other car slewed. 1 swung wide left and sprayed fire at the ditch. Bullets stitched dirt, found rock, kissed the tank and pouted. The platoon answered in disciplined bursts, teeth clenched around their names. Travers left, Morrow said. The handwheel resisted, then yielded. Leo's tiny fingers walked along the ring as if counting rivets. Morrow felt the hint of a rhythm there, a child's music that somehow matched the cadence of the Travers. He banished the thought, no magic, just steel. The sight found the second car. Before Morrow could speak, Leo tapped the lip of the hatch twice, an impatient little drummer. The child wasn't looking through the sight, he was looking at the fog, at the way it cold, as if reading sentences in smoke. Send, Morrow said again. The second shell punched through the car's side panel and turned the interior into a sudden red sermon. The vehicle slewed and stopped. The men inside did not get out. The remaining cars lost their appetite. They hugged the fog and spat anger into it, then reversed, tires tearing up wet grass. One tried for a brave arc to the right, aiming to pass the tank and take the infantry from behind. Not today, Morrow said. Calder, pivot, before the order finished. Leo was already pointing at the ground ahead, then drawing a small circle with his finger around the stone wall, not over it. Calder saw the line in his periscope slit. The wall made a crescent that, if followed, would deny the car its angle and force it into the open for a heartbeat. Calder obeyed. The tank's right track bit, left track dragged, the hull swung. The car overcommitted, momentum carrying it past the wall's lip. For a single, perfect second it was framed like a portrait. Send, Morrow whispered. The gun spoke. The car stuttered, caught fire reluctantly, and then entirely. Silence fell in pieces. The fog just kept being fog. Rabbit let out a laugh that tried to be brave and ended up astonished. 3 shots, 3 coffins. Ill by the gunner a drink. You'll buy the kid a glass of milk, Calder said, breathless. He turned us before I could think. Morrow's hand still held the wheel. The metal hummed faintly under his palms. Or maybe that was only blood. He looked at Leo. The boy stood with his feet wide, two small parentheses, on the dust toy tank tucked in his elbow, other hand still lifted as if giving the sky directions. "Good work," Morrow said. The words were not enough for anything that had just happened, but they were what men said when the world didn't kill them yet. They didn't linger. Smoke is a messenger. They moved, using the wall as spine, the ditch as whisper. The platoon flowed with them, shadows learning new shapes. The ravine arrived as an absence, a long bite taken out of the land. Its sides were muddy and argued with gravity. At the bottom, a trickle of water pretended not to be an obstacle. "Bridge?" Calder asked. "No bridge," Rabbit said after a scan. "But there's a place where wagon ruts go down and up. If they did it with wood and stubbornness, so can we. Or we end up as a monument," Calder muttered. Leo peered over the hatch lip. He made a small sound, not fear, not delight. Consideration. Then he lifted his toy tank, tipped it nose down, and tapped twice on the turret ring again, as if marking time for a descent. Morrow studied the far side, a shallow S-curve of ruts, a cut-through scrub, two embedded stones that could be either steps or teeth. He weighed the tank's center of gravity, the depth of the mud, the angle of the climb. "We can do it," he said, "but slow. And if we slip, we don't fight the slide, we ride it until the tracks find purchase again." They went in nose first. The world tilted, the engine growled with effort, mud climbed like a living thing. Calder coaxed, the clutch like an apology. The left track spun once, twice, found a root, caught. The right track chewed through a memory of last autumn and spat it out. They reached bottom, the water kissing the treads with cold indifference. "Half throttle," Morrow said. "Feather. Don't dig, don't lunge." They climbed. The tank became a stare, then a promise, then a question. Halfway up, the right track slipped and the hull yawed. Outside, men braced as if their thighs could hold the world steady. Leo leaned forward and pressed his hand flat against the hatch rim against small weight. No physics worth naming, and whispered a word no one but Morrow heard. "Up." "Up," Morrow echoed, but for Calder. "More grip, ease now." Calder found the exact sliver of throttle that wasn't too little and wasn't too much. The hull rolled, barked, and then crawled the last feet like an animal that refuses to die where it can be seen. They crested. Every lung emptied at once. "Next time," Rabbit said, voice shaking with laughter, "we bring wings." They moved along the ravine's far lip, wheels of their escort sliding on wet grass. The fog thinned, light hardening. On the horizon, a hump of land gathered in certainty. Hill 45, not impressive, but inevitable. "Almost there," Morrow said, and immediately regretted it. Words like that invited attention. Attention obliged. A crack from the left, not a rifle heavier. A shell threw dirt in a contemptuous fountain 10 meters forward. Another landed short, thumping the stomach of the earth. Artillery battery. Left quadrant. Rabbit barked. "Counter battery?" Calder asked. "We're one gun and a bad mood," Rabbit said. "Counter battery is called fantasy." "Smoke?" Morrow asked. "Spent," Rabbit replied. Trees kept the change. Leo did not point left toward the guns. He pointed right, hard right at a thin line of saplings where the field wanted to become a wood. Then he made a chopping motion. "Pun down, cut across." "They'll expect us to hug the ravine," Morrow said. "So we won't." Calder, right. Fast as we dare. They broke from the predictable line and knifed across open ground. The next shell landed where they would have been, which felt like an insult and a benediction. The saplings took them in, flexible, forgiving, brushing the hull with green fingers. In the sudden cover, Rabbit caught a clear burst on the radio, holding Hill new corridor open at south face armor units, trickling through. "If you hear this, make for the south face." Morrow smiled without humor. "We hear you." The trees ended, spitting them into a shallow swale that curved toward the hill's southern shoulder. Ahead, Figures moved, friendly helmets, friendly posture, the geometry of men not trying to murder you. The platoon stumbled into cousins, same uniforms, same eyes made older by short weeks. Hands clapped shoulders. Names were traded like cigarettes. A lieutenant with a face like a fresh bruise approached the tank. "You the ones dragging half a forest's worth of smoke behind you?" "That's us," Morrow said. He angled his head toward the hatch. "And this is Leo." The lieutenant blinked up. He had probably prepared a speech for any number of things: reinforcements, ammunition, orders. Not for a 3-year-old in a commander's cupola holding a toy version of the machine he stood in. Hello, he managed. Leo nodded with grave courtesy. "We're consolidating on the south face," the lieutenant said to Morrow, recovering. "If we hold till noon, command says reinforcements will be more than rumors." "Well, hold," Morrow said, and meant it because he had to. The tank settled into a defilade position with a view that commanded the ravine approach. The platoon took positions that made geometry into survival. Calder cracked his knuckles. Rabbit organized channels out of static like a magician pulling doves from a hat made of rain. Morrow rested his hands on the turret ring. Leo leaned against his side, toy tank in the crook of his arm. The boy's head was warm through the sweater. He hummed again, that tuneless thread that somehow knew the Travis's pace. "First turn of the turret," Rabbit said softly behind them. "Not bad for a morning's work." "Not the last," Morrow replied. He looked out at the hill, at the approach, at the place where danger would certainly come from because it was tidy that way. He felt the engine's warmth in his knees, the weight of steel around him, the light weight of a child at his side. Between those two weights, he found the balance he needed. "Eyes up," he said. "We hold dot by mid-morning." The hilltop was no longer a refuge but a target. The fog had burned away, replaced by light too clear, too honest. It showed everything, the ravine curling like a scar, the black bones of the farmhouse they had left behind, and most troubling, the glints of armor circling at a distance, patient as wolves. Rabbit squatted by the radio, headset clamp, face gray. "Same chatter on every channel," he said. "They know we're here. They're closing the ring. If reinforcements are coming, they're late or dead." The men shifted uneasily in their shallow foxholes. Some chewed at dry rations, just to keep their mouths busy. Others polished rifles that were already spotless. Calder kept circling the tank, touching the skirts, adjusting bolts that didn't need adjusting. Restlessness had become the only fuel left. Morrow studied the map on the hull. The paper was wrinkled, sweat-stained, corners curling. He traced their position with a blunt pencil. A red circle around the hill seemed to draw itself. "They've got us penned," he admitted. "We can hold for a while, but not forever." The words hung there, a weight no one wanted. Then Leo stood. He had been crouched on the turret with his toy tank, tracing shapes in the dust. Now he climbed up, balanced on the rim of the hatch with the casual fearlessness only a 3-year-old could own. He looked around the ring of soldiers, their faces drawn, their eyes clouded. He tilted his head, puzzled, as if wondering why these tall men had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Leo raised his toy tank high, its chipped turret pointing outward. He spun in a slow circle, mimicking the real turret's traverse. His small voice rang out, clear and sharp, boom. He turned the toy again, boom. And again, boom. The sound was not a child's game. It was a verdict, a reminder. Each boom landed in the soldiers' chests like a burrowed heartbeat. Rabbit let out a snort. "Hell, Hayes got more confidence than all of us put together." Calder chuckled low, shaking his head. "Guess he'll follow orders if the general says so." Even the lieutenant cracked a reluctant smile. "Not regulation," he muttered, "but effective." Morrow leaned against the turret, watching the boy. Something shifted in the air, nothing supernatural, just human, fragile, necessary. Men who had been staring at the dirt now looked outward again, rifles steadying, shoulders squaring. "Listen up," Morrow said, catching the wave before it broke. "We are not surrounded. They are. Because this hill is ours, and because this steel beast still breathes. They want to squeeze us, fine. Let them choke on the grip." A ripple of nods passed through the platoon. Leo lowered his toy, hugged it to his chest, and sat cross-legged on the hatch rim, content. His work was done. The first probing attack came just before noon. Machine guns raked the slope, testing angles, measuring fear. The platoon answered in tight, disciplined bursts. The tank's cannon roared once, sending a shell screaming downrange. The enemy melted back into the folds of the land, unsatisfied. The men reloaded calmly, no longer glancing at the horizon with panic. Leo clapped once, then mimed turning a lever, as if already preparing for the next shot. "Kid's better than a sermon," Rabbit said under his breath. Morrow nodded. "He reminds us what we're fighting with, and what we're fighting for." The ring tightened, yes, but inside it, hearts had uncurled. And as dusk began to gather, Morrow realized something astonishing. For the first time in days, he believed they might actually see tomorrow. The night was long and mean. Enemy fire came in brief bursts, probing, teasing, reminding them they were prey in a tightening snare. The platoon answered when necessary, but conserved ammunition like water in a desert. Sleep came in scraps, stolen under blankets of noise and fear. By 0:00, the world had gone completely black. No stars, no moon, just the heavy velvet of waiting. Morrow sat against the tank tread, eyes shut, listening. The tank ticked faintly as the engine cooled, like a giant beast snoring. At 0:50, Leo stirred. He hadn't spoken since his last boom, but now he climbed the turret. Toy tank clutched to his chest, and tapped Morrow's shoulder. He pointed east. "Light," he said simply. Morrow squinted. The horizon was still thick with darkness, but a faint smear of gray bled into it. Dawn wasn't here yet, but it was coming. Leo pointed again, insistent, then mimed pushing forward with both hands. His tiny face was calm but resolute. "He's telling us to move," Rabbit muttered, rubbing his eyes. "At dawn. When they expect us to stay pinned." "Dawn's when visibility flips," Calder said. "They'll be half-blinded, still adjusting. We'd have a minute. Maybe less." Morrow ran his tongue over his teeth, thinking. "It's madness." Rabbit grinned tiredly. "Everything we've done since finding this kid has been madness. But somehow, it's worked." Morrow looked at the men, slumped and hollow-eyed, but watching him now, waiting for a decision. He looked at Leo, clutching his toy tank like a banner. "All right," Morrow said finally. "At first light, we punch a hole. Straight through. We break the ring before it breaks us." The eastern sky cracked open an hour later, bleeding pale fire. Shadows fled in streaks across the fields. Enemy positions lit up in sudden confusion. The change in light had caught them mid-adjustment. "Now," Morrow barked. The engine roared awake, coughing, then growling like it wanted blood. Calder slammed the tank into gear. The tracks chewed earth, mud spraying. The platoon ran alongside, rifles ready. Enemy fire spat from the left. Bullets sparked on the armor, whining ricochets. Leo pointed ahead and slightly right where the line was thinnest, a seam in the enemy cordon. Morrow didn't hesitate. Calder, 2 points starboard, full throttle. The tank surged. Its cannon barked once, the recoil slamming through its steel bones. A machine gun nest vanished in a shower of dirt and screams. "Push, push," Rabbit yelled over the din. The men followed, using the tank as both shield and hammer. They poured fire into enemy trenches, driving the defenders back step by step. Another shell exploded to their left, tossing a man into the air. For a heartbeat the platoon faltered until Leo, impossibly steady, raised his toy tank and jabbed it forward again, his small voice ringing above the chaos. "Go." And they did. The tank smashed through the line, grinding over a barricade of logs and sandbags. The enemy scattered, stunned by the suddenness of the charge. Smoke filled the air, acrid and hot. The platoon pushed through the gap like water through a burst dam. On the far side, the field opened rolling ground, leading toward the southern slope of Hill 45, where friendlies still held. They were out. Not safe, not free, but out. The men cheered raggedly as they ran. Calder whooped inside the driver's seat, a cracked, wild sound. Rabbit pounded the radio, shouting coordinates into the static. Morrow leaned from the hatch, scanning the field. Behind him, Leo was smiling for the first time, broad, bright, a child's smile untouched by war. And for a heartbeat, even with shells still falling and smoke clawing the sky, it felt like victory. But victory was never free. Behind them, horns blared deep, metallic. Engines growled in response. Enemy armor, heavier than the cars they had faced before, was already moving to close the gap again. The breakthrough had bought them survival. The next fight would decide if survival lasted more than a few hours. Morrow gritted his teeth. Enjoy the dawn, boys. The day's going to be worse. Leo just hugged his toy tank tighter and kept looking forward.